In this tutorial, I'll show you how to build this animated intro effect using text nodes, deformers, the timeline, and the curve editor. So lots of ground to cover today. Let's create a new composition to get started. I'll start with my background video. I'll drag in this video from the resource browser into the node graph, and I'll give it an image 2D so it's rendered into the viewport. It's a bit bold on its own, so I'll add a color correction to mute the colors slightly, with a little bit more gamma and a little bit less contrast, so it feels a bit more like a background element. Now I'll add the text to my scene. I'll start with the 2D route to give the text a 2D canvas to render onto, and I'll set its origin to center, so any new objects in the 2D route will render into the center of the viewport. Now I'll add the text by pulling in the font from the resource browser. Connecting to the 2D route, it's a little bit off center, so I'll set a custom pivot point at the center of the text. Now the text is nicely centered, I'll change the text string to something a little more exciting. Run seems like a reasonable word for this dynamic look. I'll also disable the extrude property, so the text doesn't have any extra geometry generated for depth. I won't be using it anyway. Finally, I'll add a material node and color it a reasonably strong red. I could have done this in the text node, of course, but I'll reuse this material soon, and it's always helpful to copy materials where you can. Let's start blocking out the animation I want to make. With the text selected, I'll jump to the timeline and cut the text to only appear after a small pause. I want this animation to last around 6 seconds, so I'll cut the overall composition to that length too. To highlight the impact of the text coming in, I'm going to add a red bar over the scene and have it flash on screen for a few frames before the text is visible. I'll jump back to the node graph and add a 2D primitive node and connect it to the 2D route. I'll hook up the red material I made earlier so the primitive color matches that of the text. After connecting it to the 2D route, I'll push the size X wide enough to fill the view, and then adjust the size Y and position until they line up reasonably closely with the underlying text. Given it will only be visible for a flash, I don't have to be too precious, so this is close enough. Again, with the primitive shape selected, I'll jump back to the timeline and cut its visibility to just before the text node appears, and only for 2 or 3 frames, just enough that you feel it more than you see it. Then lastly for the text, I want to animate the letter spacing so it tightens in as it appears in the view, before slowly widening again in the seconds after. I'll start by giving the space scale a keyframe and a pretty large value of 8. Then quickly jump down to 0.5 after about a second or so. Then, jumping to the end of the composition, I'll raise it again to just a little bit above 1, so after the text appears, it slowly spreads again. The default animation doesn't feel right here, as is often the case with bespoke animations like this, so let's jump to the curve editor to sort it out. I'll take my first keyframe and pull the curve downward, making the text aggressively tighten up. On the second key, I'll adjust the angle a little bit so it isn't quite as flat, and soften the curve through the corner a bit. And on the last key, I'll pull the curve so it's a flat, slow incline towards the end, but still keeping a nice smooth curve through the corner. I could spend all day tweaking this curve, but I'll leave it here for now. Right, I've got the core of the text animation here. Let's push it further with some deformers. I'll start with an extend deformer. This node cuts and shifts polygons along a given axis, which is really great for these stretchy glitch effects on geometry. Connecting to my text and rotating the heading, I can see the text gets stretched quite a lot, so I'll pull it down a bit for now. I really like how moving the extend shifts the text, so I'll start with it a little bit further to the right, pushing the letter N out a bit. Around the same time as the letter scaling tightens, I'll pull this to the center of the letter U. At the end, I'll shift it a tiny bit to the right again, just to keep up with the slight offsetting of the letter U by the letter scaling. The curve is still a little bit too slow at the beginning, so let's jump to the curve editor to sort it out. In this case, I just need to adjust the curve to drop a lot faster at the start, and I can adjust the smoothness with the second keyframe. Again, if I had more time, I'd perfect it a bit, but I'll leave it here for now. Lastly, I think it'd look pretty cool if the strength of this extent varied over time too. I'll start on the first frame and increase the offset a bit. Then, once again, I'll jump to where the text is tightened up and drop the value a lot, but not quite to 0. Lastly, at the end, I'll raise it again. I'll push this one a little further too, as I think this stretching effect really sells this look. Once again, I'll jump to the curve editor and adjust the curve a bit more to make sure it lands with a decent punch. Similar to the letter gap, I'll make the first keyframe a pretty aggressive drop, the second keyframe managing a nice smooth corner, and then a slow rise towards the end. Right, with the extend added, there's one more deformer I want to add to really sell the impact on that first frame. I'd like to skew the text a bit, so as the text comes in, it's a bit skewed as well as extended, for a little more of a glitchy look. I'll add a plane deformer and connect it to the text node. I'll then move the transform position X a little bit to the left, just so I can see what's going on. It's applying to everything, so let's add some fall off to fade the displacement a bit. If I set the fall off to planar and the axis to Y, the fall off will fade vertically along the Y axis. Now I just need to move the fall off above the text a bit, and then adjust the outer range so it just meets the bottom of the text, creating the skew effect. Now I just want it to flash for a moment, so I'll be using the same process as with the 2D primitive. I'll select the node, jump to the timeline, then cut the in-out frames. I'll cut this slightly shorter than the primitive box at just 2 frames, and then move it to just as the text appears. Right, this is feeling pretty good. I think now's a good time for the finishing touches. First, I'll add a pixel sort on the original video. I think this could really add some extra glitchiness to the effect. I'll animate the threshold down from 1 so I can see it pull in with the text, matching the timing with when the text appears. After that, I'll give it a fairly slow decline. One last trip to the curve editor. I'll set the interpolation mode here to linear for all of these keys, as I just want some clean value changes here. Cool. Next, I think the background video is still a little bit too visible when the text comes in and it's clashing a bit. I'll add another color correction node and set it to apply after the pixel sort. I'll pull the brightness down a bit, as I think that creates a nice separation between the text and the video behind. I don't want to apply on the first frames though, so I'll jump to the timeline for a final time and cut its active to a frame before the text appears. All this staggering of effects helps the whole look feel a little more like a transition and not a hard cut. Finally, the text animation feels just a hair too smooth for a glitchy effect, so I'd like to drop down the FPS for just that look but leave the video updating real time, which is perfect for the frame buffer node. This node captures a frame at a rate specified by the frame grab rate property. The value is per second, so a value of 1 equates to grabbing 1 frame every second. Now that's horribly slow. I think I'd like a rate closer to 15 frames per second, which is easy to convert with the simple formula of seconds divided by frames. So 1 second divided by 15 frames. And that's everything I wanted to cover today. I hope you got some cool ideas for how to make your own glitchy text effects, with the timeline and deformers doing a lot of the heavy lifting today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.